Hi, everyone. This is the session in the Stronger right now, which I'll be covering the supply chain security from the trend, risk, and strategy perspective. So before we head on, I just wanted to introduce myself. This is Priya Pandey. I am based out of Ireland, and I've been working in cybersecurity from almost 10 years now. I've got an extensive experience in third-party security, which has now changed into the supply chain management as well as we go ahead, because when I started my career, we were always talking about the third parties. We were not thinking about the fourth parties or any other extended parties as such. And over the time, when we have seen the trend, it has turned from third party security to supply chain security, which has the wider range of ecosystem coming in, which I'll be talking across in the upcoming time. So I've got experience in third party or supply chain security, digital identity, and overall data protection. So in today's session, I will be covering this particular in the agenda items. So first one, I'll be just talking about what is your supply chain ecosystem and where do you see your attack surface. At the same time, we have seen over the time, in the current time, where the trend has gone, where the breaches have come up, and where do we actually see the key potential that might come up in future. At the same time, we'll be also talking about some of the key supply chain risks, and then we will be also talking and covering about why do we actually need that supply chain security? Is it just related to your security of data? Is it something that we need to protect over the time? And then towards the end, I'll just talk about some key pointers on supply chain strategies to secure, and then the key takeaways. So moving on. So the first one is, what is your supply chain ecosystem and where do we see the key risks coming up? Throughout this presentation, you will see me talking about the supply chain in terms of different ranges. It can be a customer service, or it can be supplier from the third party giving you these supplies for your production environment, or it can be manufacturing or inventory management or whatnot. So it's like for any system to run in successfully, we are quite connected nowadays from the different angle, from your procurement to your customer. And at the same time, if they are within your organization, within your internal system, you might be able to protect it. But sometimes now we have seen that it has been moving on to the aspect of having more third-party inclination or the third-party supply chain management, where for procurement, we end up buying a third-party tool, or for inventory management, we're buying another tool. And we do have a high dependency on that we end up just purchasing a third-party tool and just leaving it off, not securing and understanding what issue or the risk it might can give you. So this is something about the supply chain ecosystem, and where do we see the trend going on right now? So if you see the supply chain trend currently is that, like I mentioned, like over the time, we have seen that the attack surface have been changed or evolved. When 10 years back, the basic third party was just a contractor coming down and doing a bit of work on the computer system or the laptop. But now when we see the attack surface has gone beyond, we see there's an adoption of cloud, there's an adoption of the third party API requirements, which is coming up, and we end up actually being relying on the wider range of attack surface, and that leads to your dependencies on the third parties. At the same time, what we have seen recently is that AI and machine learning related attacks are also picking up. So when I say that, what attackers are doing is that they are using AI and machine learning strategies to attack and find the vulnerabilities, and it is more automated and easier to crack on. So that is also sometimes we've seen the trend over the time. Now, IoT is also one of those that we don't see a very consistent security standard as well. Fourth party risk is my favorite one right now, because every time when I see a third party management or third party program which is being picked up by the organization at this point of time, they do think from the perspective of how do we actually go ahead and think beyond, because there's something called island hopping attacks, basically, because what happens is that it's not just limited to your own entity which you're signing contract with. It is also to do with the where is your third party is signing a contract with the fourth party or the fifth party. And earlier, when I used to just start the business of the program, it used to just look like we are just going for a proper third party management without even thinking how those will be impacted or validated. Just we used to just follow a basic understanding on the ISMS requirement, but it has gone beyond. And I'll be talking about how, especially in Europe, has been a great requirement on fourth party risk as well. and there are a few on the targeting software suppliers, and also we have seen that in the COVID-19 when the pandemic happened, and something that has gone back, but in reality, I know it's been 2 years that we have over pandemic, but what has happened, the adoption of the cloud, adoption of the digital world has gone very high. And because of that, your attack surface, everything connects, and it has become a very high impact on the organization. On your right, you can see that I specifically called out a detail about the United States. And we have seen that from 2017 to 2023, we have seen that there have been a very much increase in the number of impacted entities. And you can see that around 2,769 entities have been impacted in 2023 in US specifically. And that means that around 58% year on year impact has gone higher in terms of the organization breaches that has happened. When I say the COVID-19 impact, you can see in 2020, there was 694 organizations. And now after that, 2021, it was a bit lower, but over the time it has gone. And we do see that going up and up as the more the data being produced, the more data has been stored on third parties or the fourth parties. And this is something that is exponentially going as well. Now, one of the key, they have been in news, like I think every morning when we get up, it's quite, we get details about the minor breaches happening across or the major breaches happening across. Some of them related to availability, some of them related to confidentiality, some of them are related to integrity, are three traits of the key pillars of information security from confidentiality, integrity, and availability perspective. But one of the breach that I want to call about is which recently happened in April 2024. Basically, it was about Sisense data breach. I'm not sure whether a lot more are aware about that particular breach which happened. Basically, if you're not familiar with that, they actually provide the services in business intelligence, which allows the users to view the status of the bunch of third-party services in one platform. Now imagine multiple third parties being connected as one platform, because at the end, as a consumer, I just want to see the end result coming up automatic from all possible third parties, or you can see your O365 or your AWS or Azure, everything is pulling the data and giving a beautiful dashboard, right? So that's that's how we sell out the best dashboard tools, doing the great data analytics work at the background. But in reality, what happened was the attackers could get access to their GitHub on-prem identity based on the post that I've seen across and read across. And then they ended up actually getting the access to their AWS secrets, which is the credential management. And then it has led to getting the access to AWS S3, where majorly the data are being stored. Now, as a best practice, they should have not been storing that in their core repositories at all. They should be using some ARM-related tool to do the credential rotation, and it's been stored and secured in the right direction and right way. But it's not something that, it's a very basic thing which has led to different angle and breaches, and it was one of the breaches which came in the limelight in April 2024, apart from the one which we have seen in July 2024 as well. So there are multiple supply chain attacks which keeps on happening. The trends is going up and up every day, and all we knew is that from the aspect of how do we secure it and what are those risks that we should be considering as we go ahead. Moving on to the supply chain security risk. So in the previous slide, I just discussed about how exactly the particular supply chain has been the issue or the trends which is coming up. But where do we see actually these risks are coming up? So like I mentioned, your ecosystem is not just limited to a software application. It is not just limited to your consumer-based application or the SaaS application. It can range from your cleaning services to your software development. When I say cleaning services, it can be a person who can just get into your office and because they have access to it, and they might just pick up the private details as well. So in that scenario, we need to understand that there's a proper background being checked, there is a proper authority, and the reputation has been attached to an organization who takes security as one of the important requirements, and they are training their staffs as well from the information security perspective. So it doesn't have to be a great software-based firm to have the right control. It can be related to your physical or digital access. Both are equally risky for an organization. Now, what we have seen is that there is a very limited visibility on the third parties and the fourth party if we are not aware about our own inventory. So what happens in a big organization or a small medium organization is that if in case that we are engaging a third party and not communicating that to the security department or any authority which are responsible for managing security in your organization, we end up getting a layer of data being stored in a place where no one is aware about apart from that business owner or that application owner. And if there is any breach, without even the security team might not be able to be aware that where exactly the breaches happen and how that happened. So the visibility is really important. At the same time, we what I've seen is that data storage or the processing locations are also being not known, because this is recently happening from the SaaS perspective, because people just go in and sign in and just sign up to all terms and conditions. But in reality, they need to know where the data is being stored. They need to read through the terms and conditions before they sign up. So this is also one of the risks that I've seen in the firms. And the fourth one is on the inadequate information security measure for the lower tier supplier. So one of my experiences that I had when I was doing the third party assessment for one of the financial organization, um, the best part about that was that if you're handling any PIIs or it is related to your availability or related to your reputation or the financial impact, we have to go through risk analysis. And if the PI is in a combination is really highly being impacted, then of course it goes to medium or a high risk vendor or third party, and then we do that kind of level of assessment. But at the same time, if it's a low tier supplier, we need to keep in mind that we are also giving them equal understanding. Like it is not just limited to just getting their information security training being done and doing a check. You should also be understanding if the person who is coming in the low tier, or if there is any particular product which is coming in the low tier, there's a proper screening being done before you sign off, because you might be able to protect your high risk or critical risk vendors, but at the same time, you need to also be focusing that if you are making sure that these tier risks are also being managed well. Apart from that, the software and the hardware required from supplier also can get compromised. So that also is one of the risks that we have seen. Excessive access to the supplier, and this is also one of the most common one that we have seen, that in an organization there might be a really good TPRM practice being done, a supply chain security practice being done from the cyber lenses, but they are not understanding that how this access are given to the supplier. So it can be a contractor having all exact same access to the internal employee, which is a risk, because at the end of the day, if the employee of the permanent employee from the organization have the access to those, they might have a business requirement. But in reality, whatever access do we give to suppliers, if they're coming as a contractor or they're coming up as doing for some piece of work or any system being stored, we need to be aware that they're properly segregated. They're getting right level of access. That's really important. And since data has been growing really huge, like data is the key that we are all working for. We are trying to protect day in and day out, but at the same time, the data is being produced in a very highly range, right? And that's the reason now the companies are relying on external data storage services. That's also one of the security risks, because we end up just archiving them, but we don't know whether they are actually being stored. Or so we need to think from the perspective that there's a proper appropriate risk and protection has been done as required based on the sensitivity of the data and the requirement. So these are some of the key risks that I wanted to highlight during this session. Now, talking about that, why do we actually need these supply chain security, right? Now, it's not just limited to protecting just data, right? It's not just like we will just say that, okay, there is a breach and then we have to protect it. But at the same time, think about if there is a breach in an organization, you are actually disrupting your key business. Specifically, if you're not able to understand it, if it is a major issue, if something, it's suppose you are hosting a website, you're selling products and your website doesn't work, and what will be the impact to your finances, what will be impact to your business continuity. So it's not just limited to data being stolen or data being compromised, it's also to do with your availability and your business continuity. So we really need to protect from that lenses as well, that your business continuity is the key depending on the type of organization or the sector you are in, you need to validate, because sometimes in manufacturing firms, you might see that availability is the key ones, whereas your confidentiality integrity is also important. But if there is a major financial impact, if the manufacturing firms are not working, so it is quite subjective to the type of work do you do, the type of organization you work with, or the type of product you make. So it's really important. Apart from that, since I am based in Europe right now, and one of the key things that we have seen over the time is the DORA and NISTO is something which is getting enforced. NISTO is really getting enforced next month itself. And earlier we did see a lot of regulatory compliance coming in from GDPR perspective. In US, we have CCPA, and we did think from the protection of the data, right? But it was majorly talking about the data being stored on the controller or the processor. Just to give the example for understanding, the controller are the organization who are actually owning the data, or the key businesses, and the processors are the one who are processing on behalf or storing on behalf of the controller. So irrespective your controller or a processor, at the end of the day, from GDPR and data protection perspective, there's a requirement to follow a certain level of the technology implementation and security perspective to secure your data. But now what we've seen, the trend is also coming up, is that these regulations like DORA and NISTO specifically calls out for the requirement of supply chain security. And NISTO specifically calls out that if we need to adopt a appropriate approach in supply chain security, make sure that there is a proper risk assessment being done, there's a proper coordinated supply chain risk has been understood, and then that's been rolled out across, and they understand how to address those issues and make sure that your organization is actually protecting the supply chain and understanding your threats, and then making sure it's being tracked, monitored regularly. Now, the third one is protection to your sensitive information. Like I mentioned on the previous one, where Sisen's threat, the issue with the breach which had happened, actually, it did lead to a lot of customer data being breached. And when I say protection of sensitive data, of course, customer trust also is something which is quite interconnected. So it leads to a lot of issues in terms of, your data is breached, you literally end up losing the customer trust. And also with the penalties of GDPR and NISTO, which is also a part of it, you as an organization, you end up paying a lot of penalties if it is not managed well, and the cost reduction as well. This is not just extensive risk, actually, it is really huge risk, because at the same time, if you are not securing your supply chain, imagine you are paying a penalty, you are actually you're paying for some of the breaches and the disruption, and the companies end up doing the certain level of work of incident response and some of the data recovery. And then of course there's legal liabilities, which is one of the topic that we keep hearing all the time. So this is not, of course, extensive list. There is the beyond that, but I just have 10 more minutes, so I'll be just jumping on to the key ones, that how do we actually make a strategy to secure your supply chain, right? So in this current strategies, again, supply chain is something which is evolving, and but when we see our supply chain strategy, it always starts with your right program in place. It's not something that is that we need to make a big changes to what we have been doing. It's just that we need to make sure that if you are adopting any new third party or any supplier, you are going through a rigorous cycle of understanding whether the right level of due diligence has been done. So I'll be jumping on into these points one by one. So first is, of course, you as an organization, you are required to establish a robust supply chain risk management program and continuously monitor, manage, and review them. So when I say this, is actually, if you think, imagine from the perspective that you have created a third-party program, and this is one of the things that I've seen across the organization, thanks to my job, that I get to work with multiple type of organization as well in multiple sectors. And what I've seen is that some of the firms might have a great, robust supply chain management program, only to do an assessment. They will have a great risk analysis being done. They are going and doing the assessment as per the period defined, but at the same time, they end up just focusing on the assessment. They they are not thinking about monitoring it on the time and managing and making sure the remediation is being done on time. Especially at this point of time when we see the threats are evolving day by day, attack surface is changing day by day, it has gone to the trend that your third parties, especially the critical or a high risk third parties, you need to understand from the perspective that you are understanding, at least getting a daily feed or at least a weekly feed from the third party tools, which is available in the market. Uh, to get subscribed to, they can tell you whether your third party was impacted or not. So it is no longer just a Excel based questionnaire sign off and you're happy to just say that, yeah, we have done this and tick mark and we can just sign off and we're doing good. But it's also like a continuous monitoring process which needs to be adopted at this point of time to make sure that you are aware about your risk and threats and your issues every day, every week. So that's something that the strategy needs to be refined. At the same time, you need to conduct thorough due diligence on the supply chain before you using their services. So what happens is that you can do one thing is that when you are signing up your contract, you are making sure that you are doing end-to-end due diligence based on the criticality or the type of data they can handle. Because at the end of the day, if you're not picking up the right set of due diligence work, if you're not picking the right assessments, or you can say the checks that has to be done, it is something which will not help you to get the sign off, because at the end of the day, the risk will still remain if you're not remediating at the right time. So it is quite suggested or recommended that if, especially in the case of your high to medium risk or a critical vendor, you need to get your sign off, get those issues resolved, get those remediated, and then jump into getting into services. Because I know that from the business perspective, and business owners are like, they want get into the application and get their users in, or just launch the website the way they want to. But in reality, if you are not following the secure by design concept, if you're not understanding the perspective that at the end of the day, if there's a breach, if there's a disruption, everything goes to zero, and then you have to restart from your penalties, from your incident response, and make you are actually getting impacted in a wider way than what you could have just managed or contained in the initial version. Now, the third one is that you need to obtain assurance from the supplier and force that there's a security measures being done, like you are encrypting your data, you are implementing MFAs. The patchings are being done, which is one of the most important things, that patchings are something which are being targeted nowadays. And you can see that a lot of news is coming up in the breach. And we also implement EDR and IDS. And we also need to follow the approach of multi-layer defense strategy, which is defense and then depth approach, where we have the multi-layer of security, control, protection about the various level of threats. So you need to know your threats. You need to know how exactly you're going to respond to them, and at least you have a defense and depth system. This one about the incident response and continuity planning. This is also something which we have seen over the time, which is one of the most important things, which I think also should be considered now, apart from your regular testing and monitoring. It's about your incident response and continuity. And what happens is that you might have signed up and the work might have resumed, but at the same time, we need to also think that as a third party, if there is any issue, or as a supplier, if there is an issue, how is their incident response plans look like? And do they have a proper business continuity planning at the place as well? Because as a processor, there might be a breach and you might not be aware. And if you are especially in the Europe region, with GDPR perspective, you have to communicate within 72 hours to the authorities if your data has been breached and you have noted this issue. So imagine from the perspective as a processor, there was a breach, but you don't know how to communicate, or as a controller, you don't even know that they have been breached. So we need to continuously go through the cycle of understanding and improving your incident response plan. And at the same time, we should be annually checking them as well as a test that it's working okay or not, in terms of just doing tabletop exercises or doing at least a bit of understanding and communication across your processor and a controller or a supplier and the organization perspective. And adding the details in your contractual agreement, which is about the security clauses. And you are also highlighting that who is responsible and who would be what would be the consequences of security breaches is really important at this point of time. And the last one is on the supply chain segmentation. The supply chain, you need to segment your supply chain. You need to isolate your critical component and make sure that you just protect your crown jewel and you are just giving those access which is really required by supply chain, and then use a proper segmentation being done. So these are some of the high level strategies that I wanted to call out. So towards the end, the key takeaways are that the breaches are something that is some that you cannot get away with. So it's really important at this point of time that you are understanding that breaches are going to happen, and supply chain is something which is one of the contributing or recent that one of the factors which has been really which we have seen the trend coming up. The second one is that you need to think that assuming the breach, or you can say that we need, whenever we create a strategy, we need to think that there is a breach. They need to create the defense in depth principle. We need to think from that when there is a breach which is inevitable right now, then we have the right decision metrics. We know how to respond to them and how to mitigate to them. So assuming breach is really important, and you are defending your system as required. Now, the third one is on the supply chain challenges. It is not just technology. We need to consider that in mind, that it is also to do with people, process, and it's also a knowledge problem. So breaches, of course, tend to happen because of technology failure. We do see that there have been news about technology failure, but also it is also related to your human error sometimes. So we need to think that from that perspective, the technology is not only responsible for this, it is a people, process, and knowledge problem as well. And lastly, security is security. So there is no gap between physical security or a cyber security. You need to understand that from the supply chain perspective, everything has to be considered as a threat. And then if there is any issues in the physical security perspective, you have to understand the threat. You need to address to them on time and make sure that the right measures are taken, irrespective it is a physical security or cyber security. Addressing those issues are really important at this point of time. So that's it for my side. Thank you.